welcome to the group. Most of us know each other and also know the exhibition already to a degree. So I would especially like to welcome Christina, who is also taking notes today, and Ricard, how do I pronounce your name?
Oops.
Ricard.
Thank you,
hear me?
Ricard.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. So yeah, thank you very much for joining this morning or evening, wherever you are. Maybe I quickly introduce who's going to be talking today. We will be talking about redrawing the economy, both as an activity, but also as part of this exhibition called Economics, the Blockbuster, which was on at the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester from June to October this year. So I'm here. My name is Catherine Bohm. I'm an artist. I'm a member of the CI and CERN. I'm working with Kuba together. We founded the Center for Plausible Economies. And Catherine, thank you very much for joining today. So maybe we just quickly introduce ourselves and then start with the slides.
Okay.
So I hand to you, Catherine, please.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Gibson. I think I know almost all of you except Ricard. And I'm based in Sydney, Australia. It's 8 o'clock at night here on the unceded territory of the Darug people. And we can talk a little bit more about the redrawing economy in a second, I guess. I'll just introduce myself. I'm a member of the Community Economies Institute and the CERN network. Yeah, happy to be here. I'll pass on to Kuba, right?
Yeah, hi, my name is Kuba and I'm based in Warsaw, Poland. And as Katrin said, together we established Center for Plausible Economies, I think back in 2018. And we have worked since. And on top of working with CPE, I also work with various self-organized groups in Poland and elsewhere. And I teach theory and post-artistic practice, artistic theory and sociology of art at Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw.
Okay, thank you. So we have about 40 slides. The idea of the presentation is to, for those who didn't see the exhibition, again, an idea of what it was like, what it was about, but then focus on this invitation and call to redraw the economy. And I just quickly wanted to contextualize this call in the work of CERN, which has been going on for many decades, redrawing the economy as a first and low-key and very accessible step to think about the economic subjects that we are, to think about the community economies that we are part of, and to think of an economy as something we can take back and organize towards our needs. So I just wanted to contextualize it within this like much longer body of work. Well, I can't, oh yeah, just trying to see how again. So redrawing the economy started with an initiative of CERN in about 2017. There was a grant to travel artists together with researchers to communities and use drawing as a tool to think about the proposition of taking back the economy and understanding each community's economy much better. So it's rooted in this like ongoing work of CERN and CEI. And then the focus today is Economics, the Blockbuster, a group exhibition at the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester, where Kuba and myself were part of the advisory and research team, and where we from the beginning used drawing and the proposition to redraw the economy both as a tool but also as a way to communicate the exhibition. Maybe just briefly, the Whitworth is a 100-year-old gallery, civic gallery in Manchester. It calls itself a constituent museum, which means that programs and activities are developed together with the constituencies of the museum. So stepping away from this approach of we have art and we explain it to you, to an approach that is we have art, how can it be of use to you, and please use it. So the exhibition lasted for about 4 months. And I'm now gonna do a quick walk through the exhibition. This was meant to be done by Poppy Bowers, who is the curator at Whitworth, but she got COVID last week and can't join today. So Economics and Blockbuster is one of the 2 large exhibitions the Whitworth does every year. And that's the entry wall to one of the 3 Victorian galleries, which from the beginning, it was clear that this is not just a show. This is a show to talk about ecosystems, about how we support each other, how artists group, institutions, communities exist within ecologies, and how the exhibition comes about. So drawing, diagramming, showing relationships of support, you can tell from the entry wall to the exhibition has been very key. The other moment that's important in terms of exhibiting is that we specifically wanted to show artistic practice as economic practice. That sounds, to me, very obvious. To a lot of audiences who come to museums, that is not so obvious, that artists could specifically run projects or run a practice as economic practice, as a business, as a trader, as an enterprise, and so on. So within the art world, this is a reading that's still not very developed, that we can read art as economic practice. So the projects 10 were shown in the exhibition, act both within everyday life and the art worlds. So I think in my mind, this is one of the really big propositions of the exhibition, that we start to read art as economic practice, as economic propositions. So that's just the first snapshot of the exhibition. If you imagine 3 Victorian galleries, relatively large with those curved roofs. The central gallery was the redrawing room, which Kuba will explain in much more detail. And on the other 2 sides were 3 artistic or art-based projects, organizations who work as economic entities, economic proposals in the real world. I'm just going to show a few for like 3 to 5 minutes. That's an ongoing work by the Cercle d'Art des Travailleurs de Plantation Congolais, together with a Belgian artist called Renzo Martens. It's a work that, in business terms, decolonizes a supply chain. And it would be too much to go into detail and explain it exactly how it works. But in short, Renzo Martens started with the CATPC, who own a small cocoa plantation in Congolese. And they are using art to turn chocolate beans into sculptures, which then re-enter the art market, the European or Western art market, to gain a value which they didn't gain previously as being sold as beans. And this extra additional income value goes back into buying more land and growing the cooperative. So it's I mean, if someone is interested, please look it up, read it up online, how it exists in detail. It's an ongoing, I think by now, 13-year-old collaboration, which plays both with art, but it's very serious about who owns land, how can we generate surplus to support a collective, how can we reverse economic relationships from multinationals exploiting farm labor to collaboratives expanding and having control over their own land, using art as a means to make more income. And of course, because it's in the art context, there's another level of story production, films, to expand and make it much more accessible what the whole project is in its very, very many different layers. One of the reasons why it's also in the show is that drawing plays a central moment in the work, in the development of this project. a constant drawing and redrawing of how economic relationships work and are being reversed and decolonized as the project develops. A second project, which I'm very confident to talk about because I'm the co-founder, is Company Drinks, based in East London. Company Drinks was invited into the exhibition to also work locally with the Grow Club of the Whitworth. Company Drinks in itself started as an enterprise in 2013 as a means to produce and reproduce inclusive public space. It started with this proposition of making drinks to make community, and over the last 10 years, it has become a much more diverse organization that supports a lot of key holder groups, local community groups, with whom we quite explicitly discuss what are the shared resources and how can we use them together. For the exhibition, Company Drinks was shown as a history and archive of drinks. Each bottle on the label explains or talks about who went picking, where did we go picking, and of course we ran the bar. So Company Drinks is this combination of both proclaiming to be an artwork but also a community enterprise, playing with the possibility that you can be more than one thing at a time. And we did a small drink together with the Manchester-based Grow Club in the gardens of the Whitworth Gallery. And just on the right-hand side, a breakdown that developed out of workshops with Catherine and Kuba, and Kate Rich was there many years ago, of how do we start to communicate that whatever we make depends on more than money. So there's a kind of 3-part breakdown of the financial, easier to quantify and less easy to quantify contributions that enabled the drink. So each project has this like layer of complexities, layer of narratives, of contributors. But of course, for the exhibition, to make it relatively clear what the central idea of each project was, we were also invited Lumbung Kiosk, which continues as a working group and a trading kiosk from Lumbung Documenta. Lumbung Documenta, if someone in this group doesn't know about it, Lumbung Documenta is one of the largest art festivals, exhibitions that take place in central Germany every 5 years. It's considered one of the main or most important events that raise discussions, that new terms for how we want to think art into the future. And what was very interesting about Lumbung last year is that Lumbung Documenta was curated by Ruang Krupa, a Jakarta-based collective of about 7 people. Lumbung means is an Indonesian term for shared rice barn, the idea of harvesting and using together. And so in that way, Lumbung Documenta 2022 was an economic proposition and practice to reorganize an art event on that scale by sharing resources rather than commissioning artists. Oh no, what can you see now? My Adobe.
We can see the Lumbung
slide.
Okay,
Lumbung.
I can't see it anymore. I have to confess that now. I have pirated Adobe software. So all I can
Watch
see.
out. You're on a recording now, Catherine. Remember.
Recorded.
Whatever. Okay, cut that out. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So they blocked my screen, so I can't see what I see now. Does it make sense?
We can see the beanbag and we can see the big poster.
Okay, but I can't see that anymore. Okay, now I can. One sec. I'm gonna speed up a bit.
Can you advance it?
Yeah, no. There's other projects. I'm not going to go into detail with each of the projects. One of the selection criteria was that each display, each group, each collective had some connection, working relationship with the Whitworth Gallery, whether it was a regional collective that works together with the constituents of the museum already, or whether it was work from like previous commissions. So that was one of the selection criteria. for what was on show. Rosalie Schweiker was commissioned to, through drawing, explain how the collection of the museum works. And again, I think this is online. Collections are very complex economic fields where value is generated, value is preserved. So to ask questions about who is in the collection, for what reason, what do we give value to, what's being worth being preserved the next 400 years, was addressed in her comic style commission. Golden and Cenobie, another example in the exhibition. Again, I think it would take too long to explain it, but in short, re-engineering a printing plate to print Albrecht Dürer's Melancholia, and raising issues around who owns the means to production within the art. And they also started printing new editions, which supports local programs. So now I'm coming to the redrawing part of the exhibition, which, as I said from the beginning, was a key method and activity to work with the Whitworth team, Kuba and myself. So it didn't just start with the exhibition, it started 2 years before the exhibition was on show as a way to research, communicate, and plan together. That's Ed, who's the head of the outreach team, the community team. And those are like small or actually quite big results from the work we did together, that we differentiated, like, why do we redraw? Yeah, redraw to understand, to plan, and to change. And all those articulations, diagrams, moments became ongoing part of the exhibition and the communication. We worked with the different teams, worked around questions of how can this invitation to redraw, this invitation to see yourself as an economic subject, how can this be communicated and also be integrated in all the different public programs and ongoing community activities of the Whitworth. So there were various workshops throughout those 2 years, different kind of pilot moments where we tried what method, what invitation, what language makes it easy enough to take on this invitation. That's a photo with the wider curatorial and management team, again, working together through this proposition that we live, exist within diverse economies. And what are they? How can we make them visible? What would people want to become more visible? What should become more visible? What maybe also should remain invisible? So workshops over 2 years to make the topic of redrawing and take back the economy part of the everyday discussion of the team, of the museum. And then when the exhibition opened in June, the central room was a redrawing room. Kuba, you want to take over, or shall I do the first bit and then you do the diagrams?
How you wish, Katrin, because you've already, I mean, like, I'm happy to help if you want.
Okay, so then I start with the room and then hand over to the diagrams, yeah?
Sure, how you wish, of course.
Yeah, so the redrawing room in the middle is, again, if you're not so familiar with, let's say, how galleries, museums work, gallery space is precious. The biggest galleries are precious. So to make the biggest gallery one that specifically talks about redrawing the economy, taking back the economy, is also quite a sign, a message to the public. The room had, I'm quickly going through the images. It had workshop elements where individual guests could draw. There was a lot of drop-in and guided workshops. And then there was a kind of curated display of about 22 iconic images throughout history that guided our economic imaginary. Those images were selected and curated by this advisory group I mentioned earlier. And it was a long discussion around how can it be made very clear that images and economy go together very, very, very closely in the context of a museum. So images that, I go back, like images, I don't have to show it, like the growth curve is a very simple image where everybody understands, okay, that was an image that has shaped our economic thinking and imaginary on a kind of broad mainstream level for too long. So we had other images that either were from the collection, images that are owned by the museum, but also kind of popular, well-known images from the last 200 years that made this connection between imagining, image, museum, and economy quite clear, I hope. There was, of course, the iceberg, you know, this like strong image like the triple down economy, just to make it quite popular, accessible, that yes, we all have those images in our heads, and we all can judge whether those economic proposals work or don't work for the communities we live in. The just transition diagram that was also presented by the Decolonizing the Economy organization in one of the workshops. And then I think I'm just looking at the time, it's half already. And I hand over to Kuba. From those many discussions, also with the team, a few new graphs and diagrams developed, made together with Textbook Studios in Manchester. And what they looked like and how they were used will be explained by Kuba.
Mm-hmm. You know what I'm thinking, that maybe it would be best if I shared my screen, because I have the same presentation, so I can simply jump in with this. Okay, this is bad. Good. Okay, so maybe I'll just thanks, Katrin. So I think like maybe one thing that it's also important to underline that during these workshops, because there were plenty, right? I mean, we were there in a mixed function a bit with as a Center for Plausible Economies. On the one hand, we had a kind of, let's say, consultancy type of work, right, Katrin? Would you call it in this way? In a sense of like, you know, being with the team of the WITWOP and trying to help them to understand their own internal processes. So these workshops that we conducted, they were mostly focused on the economies of the institution, of the art museum. And out of that, a couple of graphs emerged that I'm going to discuss. And then the process looked like this, so that we basically conducted these workshops using quite often the iceberg diagram, right? This was like the starting point. So we're basically discussing visible, invisible economies, what is paid, what is unpaid, what is also in art, it's important to underline. And I think we've already discussed it a couple of times, but because of this topsy-turvy economies of art, in which art is valued because art is precious because it is priceless, for example, right? So like, or artists are often unpaid and yet celebrated. This visibility has like lots of different meanings. So it's not solely monetized, right? And then that's why we need to readjust certain visual metaphors that we know from the work of Sen or from the work on kind of like such as iceberg, to discuss this very specific way how artistic institutions are getting organized. But anyway, so we have conducted, I don't know how many, like 4 or 5 workshops or 7, I lost count, but we were with the WITWOP team for quite a long while. So basically between 2019-20 to 2023, but we need to account for pandemic. So basically it was also very hard to really conduct this exercise, as you can imagine. And not only that, what is another disruption that we had to face, and this is very important, I think, to mention, is that there was a change of directorship. So basically, we were invited by Alistair Hudson in 2019 to work on this kind of consultancy, being also part of the curatorial group, being also part of the, let's say, like artist team in a sense of creating this installation and basically delivering some kind of like visual contribution or artistic contribution to the exhibition. So this happened in 2019 when we were invited, but then there was COVID, and after COVID, for what I will not get into details, but he was forced to resign from his position. And then there was quite a long period when there was no director in the exhibition, and just when we installed the show, the new director was appointed, and she started her tenure basically in the last months of the exhibition. So of course, like, this made things quite a bit complicated in terms of process, because we were working on consulting the institution in the state of basically major institutional change, and not only that. In terms of process, what we did, we basically kind of conducted these workshops with a group of people, mostly with curators and educators and facilitators from the W12. And then we tried to glean some images that emerged out of this workshop. And then we were also honing them with, like Kacin said, with Textbook Studios, a group of graphic designers who helped us to illustrate this, or like to turn it into cohesive visual language. So maybe I'll start with the first. So this is basically when you saw, Kacin at the beginning showed you the slide that presented the entrance to the exhibition. So this is, let's say, a back wall. So this is like, this is also a corridor leading to, it's a kind of like used corridor. It's opening to a park that surrounds the W12, and then it's also a passage to a cafe that is very vivid. So it is not kind of, let's say, totally unnoticed. It is actually quite noticed wall. Yeah, but this is like, let's say, also entrance wall to this redrawing room. And here we used Hazel Henderson's image of I think it's a system of economic system of industrial society, explained as this three layers cake with icing. But I think, I mean, we discussed it with Kacin, right, when you were there, that this is quite kind of a metaphor that has its limits, but we used it because it was a bit more, let's say, multi-layered, to be within an iceberg, which plays with what is visible and what is invisible, and we use it as a metaphor to try to think about the economies of the museum. So basically, but it's kind of like basically inventorying. So I think the idea was to inventorize, such as like, like in terms of the diverse economies, like kind of approach to think about actually what comes into the exhibition, what is typically unregistered. And we used this Henderson's image as a kind of, let's say, guiding metaphor, or like visual metaphor to visualize the data. And she basically split her argument is that monetized economies, like, or capitalocentric economy, is like icing on a cake. Beneath it, you have like the state-owned enterprises. Mid layer is constituted by social economies, and the bottom layer is, let's say, she calls it Mother Earth, but basically it's natural ecosystems. And we try to use it to discuss how the layered economies of this exhibition, of this particular exhibition, work. And so, surprisingly or not, it was quite a lot of work to actually get this data, because usually people just, I will show in the detail how it operates, because this is like this is possibly hard for you to read, but because usually people are so very much focused on the numbers or on artworks. So basically, you either get budgets, or like like when you think about exhibitions, the primary, let's say, approach would be to focus on artists, artworks, maybe curators. This is what is named, right? These are people who are basically celebrated, and artworks and types of experience that are registered. And we kind of like, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. So we said, okay, so this exhibition is just like a cherry on a cake, right? So what you typically see in this space is just a cherry on a cake, but beneath it you have like this vast realm of economic practices that underpin it, without which this cherry wouldn't be there. So as you can see, so this is cherry. So these are like, so here like we list basically who was exhibited, like what kind of, like, what is also the usual, so artist collectives, public workshops, economic drawings, merchandise in the shop, one new drink. So this is, I think, also the way how Kacin, you are like quite often developing stuff with company drinks, and also what you kind of try to do in the compost in Kacin's exhibition in the showroom, to kind of make this listing, which is also not entirely obvious. So that these are some items that are kind of, typically people would not register them. For example, merchandise in the shop, people would not think about it as part of the exhibition, right? This is something that is usually, let's say, marginalized or unregistered. So then we thought that this, like, let's say, icing would be institutional support across the V12. And here we had like a huge discussion whether or not to reveal the numbers in a sense of whether to focus on the budget or not, whether to give any kind of like economic, like tag on it. And there was like a huge reluctance from the V12 team to actually do it. And I think at the end of it, this was right. We can discuss why and how it happened, but they did not want to give a number because they were a bit anxious that in the cost of living crisis, people will simply jump on this one number and then they will start to tear at the show for saying, okay, this costs, let's say, £200,000 and we cannot afford social housing or something like that, right? And there are like major austerity and cuts, etc., etc. But here we tried to, as you can see, these are both financial and non-financial, let's say, contributions. So it's not only money that comes into it, but let's say directors, how many assistants worked, art technicians, conservators, freelance producers, and give a couple of numbers, number of visitors, etc., etc. So like basically, it was, let's say, quite intuitive how we split it, and it was not very clear cut because you could argue that, for example, visitors could come to social layers of this exhibition, and yet we put it into the top one. So here you have 3 other layers. So it would be institutional support, social support structures, and artistic commons. And institutional support, these are mostly partners and funders that directly and indirectly support the exhibition. So let's say, we just kind of tried to present the institution not as a entity on its own, kind of independent of its own kind of institutional infrastructure, like institutional infrastructure in a sense of like a system of connections in which it functions. So like partnerships and various agencies, or like university, for example, Whitworth is part of the university, right? So this is something that is very important to underline, that this exhibition would not come without this kind of, let's say, wider institutional support system. Second layer, but then, there are like also what we wanted to really emphasize here is that there are also the social support structures. So much less defined, because of this first layer, you can still think about it as, let's say, the list of sponsors and partners, right? That's what we do typically. So you basically name all the institutions that gave you money or maybe provided some support. You have some kind of contractual agreements, etc., that define who needs to be named and in which capacity. But what is very important to underline, I think, is that, or we think, that there is like beneath this, let's say, institutional partnerships, you have the vast and much less defined and yet not any less important layer that is constituted by this gift economies, collectives, networks, that somehow every of those artists and contributors are enmeshed it. And without the social structures, without the social networks, it wouldn't be possible for them to operate, right? So that's what's, and usually this is just taken for granted and completely unregistered, right? Specifically in arts, but not only. I think that usually that's how quite often we operate. And the third layer, which also is equally important. So we thought, okay, so we have like in this case, Henderson's, we have this, let's say, general ecologies, and here we wanted to emphasize the role of artistic commons. Of course, we could also think about ecologies in the wider sense, but we wanted to emphasize what is specific for art. It's basically covered also. Sorry, I just have somebody rings at my door, but I will not pick it up now. But I'm a bit distracted. But artistic commons, it's this, let's say, ecosystem of ideas or general public sphere that is a repository of ideas and styles and of concepts that are necessary to create anything in arts, in science, wherever, but usually we just also take it as a resource to be taken. And here, like listing, I think it's a very why we did it. I'm just this is the end of this particular one. But why we did it, why we listed this, why we inventorized, I think with a very similar motivation, how SEN operates, or like how community economies think about it. So that once you inventorize it, once you think that it exists, you can also think about how to change your economies in order to support these various social or kind of immaterial or material economies that support your undertaking or enterprises. And Katrin already discussed this these two graphs. So this is basically also like kind of abstract images that guided or structured the redrawing room, growth curve, and this donut economies. And here is another graph that we also did, and this was, I think, presentation. Which presentation, Katrin, was it? Was it like a presentation of the IDT art worlds, which we did?
It was around, but the constituent museum, it's like, what's the function of a museum? You know, what economies are supported by a museum, acknowledging that it, of course, it's a double-sided coin, what a museum does, but it's still a choice of any museum, any organization, like which economies do you want to support and which do you want to undermine?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about, I talked about this specific image because, as you can see, it's LTD IDT. So this is like we used our IDT notion as kind of emphasizing that these economies of the museum can be organized in there is a choice, right? So there is an alternative, but also we thought that this alternative is not kind of like black and white, but quite often you basically, these museums are kind of double-sided, or that you can flip it, you know, and then that it's like one side of the coin, another side of the coin. So here argument is conveyed also by the image, right? So that these economies are very rarely you have an institution that would operate on the bright side or a dark side. They usually kind of match with various systems in order to sustain their operations. But still, we wanted to emphasize that this is an alternative, and it's not necessarily something that is taken for granted in the arts. I think that this is something that quite a few people rather shun from discussing. So like we talked about, so we talked both about institutional models, so like museum of 1% or constituent museum, but also we talked about actions and we talked about assemblages, right? So the idea was that by privatizing art, you also change what art becomes. So how you by what you do with this changes the status of how art is marketed and what becomes out of it. So that when you privatize art, art becomes a speculative asset, a status symbol, a commodity, an instrument of gentrification, and art is removed from the many. And this is also specifically done by various institutions that operate in this way. So that we kind of like boiled it down to this 5-liner. Museum of the 1% uses its collections and exhibitions to change art into luxury, fuel a speculative and exploitative economy, bolstering prestige of private patrons and weakening cultural democracy. Of course, it's kind of like also exercise in sloganeering, let's say, right? Because this is something this was like quite heated and long debate, how to boil it down into like this very comprehensive 5 lines of text. And commoning art, this is a different mode that institutions can operate in. When you common art becomes an ecosystem. It's like a social value, is made by many, is more like it's more processual, and it's a public practice. And then constituent museum, this is how Whitworth fashions itself, or like it used to fashion itself. Let's see how it develops. Uses its collections and exhibitions in collaboration with its communities to make art accessible as a tool for cultural democracy, strengthening cultural commons. And this is basically looped. So when you have like cultural commons, constituent museums have an ecosystem in which it can operate to use its collections and exhibitions in collaboration with its communities, etc., etc. So it's basically a circular argument emphasizing the variety of models in which, or like alternative models in which these institutions can operate and then or can adapt. So this is basically. Shall we talk, Katrin, about how this redrawing room operated during the exhibition. So Katrin already mentioned it, but we have couple of images here. So people basically really used it. I think that this was quite surprising and it was a very positive surprise as well. But people inspired by these graphs, they picked up. Sometimes we did it during the workshops, which were kind of led by us. There were few, let's say 3 or 4 during the entire exhibition when we means me and Katrin when we were there and did something. But otherwise than that, there were like I think regular sessions. These are workshops kind of by us. The regular sessions. This is also a workshop by us or by me, but there were also sessions organized by other people who used the room, and there were also individuals who basically made some images and they simply put it on the wall. And there were instructions for redrawing, right? That's what Katrin talked about, that this was an attempt to also make a kind of quite comprehensible instruction so that it would be understand without without the person to explain it or like to lead the workshop, so that people could contribute on themselves.
Maybe Kuba, just to add, those instructions, once instructions sound quite simple. It's the result of a long collaborative editing process, and that was really this constant feedback with the team of how is this show not about economy, but how will you leave that show and think, okay, I'm an economic player as well. So it was a lot of tuning of language to make this very clear. And I think, Catherine, it would be very nice to bring you into the discussion now, because you've seen the exhibition and you've seen the redrawing room. And I think maybe both to connect it back to the wider shared work we do around redrawing, but also maybe if you could comment on what was different about this being in a museum to, let's say, it being in other spaces where it's normally being used.
Yeah, sure. It's fantastic. I love, actually, thank you so much, both of you, for going through the exhibition again like this. It was a lot for me to take in on the one night I saw it. And also it was very much at the beginning. So it was all, it wasn't the beginning, but for you, it was a long process. It was the middle of something, but in terms of that open face to the public, it was the beginning, and these rooms hadn't started to be used yet. So it was more of a promise of what might happen. So it's so wonderful for me to now see what people actually did with the space and what they came up with. But in terms of, the difference between doing it in an institution like this versus the kinds of workshops that we originally did with Redrawing the Economy, they were held in 3 different countries where the Take Back the Economy book had been translated. So we did workshops in Korea, in Colombia, and in Finland. And in each case, we teamed up with our translators, but we also teamed up with local community groups that were, in some ways building community economies. So it was very much more of an engagement with people already in the community who were, running social enterprises or involved in recolonizing, land in Colombia and so on. So I guess the process was trying to fit in with what people were already doing and then see what new images might emerge out of the work they were doing in each case. And that was, we had less of the kind of inventory analysis that you've just produced here of the institution, because in your case, you had an institution to focus on, the museum, and you were able to expose the economy, the diverse economy of the museum, and then use that as one of the kind of building blocks of what you were doing. So I think this is a really interesting development here, because in Take Back the Economy, the tools are there to do this kind of work, to do this kind of inventory, but we've never really done it on one particular institution. It's that kind of, those tools have been used in place in different contexts, and different of the exercises have been used in some of those communities that we worked with before. So this is a kind of a different iteration, and it's, I guess the interface here for us was the workshop we had at the Centre for Plausible Economies, where people from Korea, Colombia, and Finland came together in the new space of the wonderful bowling club that's been turned into the Centre for Plausible Economies. And we also had that workshop with artists. So there was an interesting kind of interface then between that community work that was happening in all those different countries, and then working with artists to start to unpack your art practice and art industry, and start to develop new tools. One of which was the wonderful one about that we worked with Kate Rich, of doing that kind of accounting that could be put onto a label or onto a T-shirt that we were talking about. So, well, I'm just amazed at how many incredible ideas and kind of techniques have emerged over the years through this process. Even more than we've ever been able to operationalize to some extent. But what's great about the Whitworth exhibition is that many of them have come together here, and we can see them operating in so many interesting ways. So it's great to get this documentation, I think, of the exhibition. Yeah, I'm really grateful that you were able to convince the institution to take it on and do it so well and so wholeheartedly. Because what was interesting about I launched the exhibition. You invited me to come and talk at the very launch, and the curators and the organizers were so welcoming and open to this process. I feel like they got a lot out of the process in all those discussions you had that led up to the opening of the exhibition. So yeah, there's so many facets here. I also sat in on one of the workshops, I think, with the local group that was the gardening or foraging group around the museum. So I mean, clearly this museum has forged a way in terms of its seeing itself as a constituent museum. So it was a great institution to work with. I mean, it was we were starting where we are with what we had, but in this case, the institution was already along the way in terms of trying to take back what it is and reframe what it is in terms of its outreach and community outreach and so on. So yeah, I'm just amazed, and I think it's I guess the challenge for us always is, and the same thing with the original iteration of it is how do we capture it and keep it so that we can showcase it more. So I'm really glad we've actually got this video of the recording of the going through the exhibition, because it'll be something we can look back on too. Yeah, but I think I haven't got anything else to add at this point, but I'm, apart from thanking you guys so much for taking it on and really running with it, because it seems like it is a very productive space, and something that could well be done in other contexts, and is being done in other contexts really, but and has a life still.
Yes, thanks, Catherine, and again, thank you for coming to the opening. It gave the whole thing weight. I just wanted to add two small thoughts, because it is within an art context, and I think it's also a certain critique that we are trying to practice here. One is that art institutions love to display those kind of radical new practices of care. There's like radical ideas of doing it differently, but the discrepancy between the exhibition that shows who does it and the organization who doing it is a very large one. And I think that's a really growing frustration within the arts, that radical ideas are used to be shown, but not to be practiced. That was the main invitation proposition of Lumbung Documenta, to really think of it as practice rather than just an interesting discourse. And I think that the other aspect is that, and I think Kuba and me are both teaching a lot of it in like art context, and know how art is seen, to appropriate drawing as quite a tool we can all use. You know, it's like the economy, take back the economy, it's like take back the art. Like those drawing sessions that you saw, they were quite easy because we could explain that it's not about making a nice drawing. It was about visualizing an economic idea or economic a knowledge you have. So that completely broke the ice of in a museum trying to do a nice drawing or working towards this kind of expectation of what is nice and who can draw. So for me, that is really an important moment as well, that in those workshops, it becomes clear very quickly that we're not doing nice drawings. We are trying to imagine different economies. So I just wanted to add those two aspects, which are probably a bit more kind of art specific than when the workshops normally take place. And we are a nice little round. I want to say hello to Claudia and Douglas. Hello. Cooper, do you want to add something right now? Otherwise, I would say we can start.
I mean, maybe about this infrastructural critique in the arts, you know, because I think art always operated on a kind of disparity between its ideals and its institutional practices. So like, you know, like you had this art that imagined itself like art for art's sake, and then it was basically underpinned by large money or something like that, just to get it into a nutshell. You know, I think that recently it has become a major problem. I mean, in a sense that it has become addressed more often than not, and people just basically calling out institutions for not operating in accordance with the ideal that they kind of preach. So it is, you know, put your money where your mouth is, this kind of stuff, right? So like practice what you preach. I think these are the things or expectations towards the museums that become more explicitly stated. Of course, the question is whether this is possible to change it or not, because of the variety of factors. Maybe just to emphasize this.
But I think other than that, we can just have a conversation round now. I don't want to, like, I can see like Claudia, you being there. Douglas, hello.
Yeah, I've got a question actually. If that's
Yeah.
And apologies, I was a little bit late. Yeah, I was wondering what the afterlife of the exhibition is, if you can see one. I know it's not been that long, so just wondering if you can see what that is or might be.
I guess, but here, like, I'm not sure whether you were at the moment when we discussed the history of this process, like, but you know, we were invited by one director, and then because of the change in the leadership, the institutional just goes to the major change. So, like, basically, because these are quite hierarchical institutions, it's very hard to say how much of this kind of philosophy of constituent museum will be implemented. But then, or like it's still being implemented, like carried over. But given some sort of like willingness, you know, I think that hopefully some of this images or some of these exercises will have some kind of lasting impact, in a sense of informing people who operate in the museum to conduct their operations in a specific manner. And not only that, we basically were also part of this development, right? So this is not something that we came to the institution and we said to them, okay, so now you have to do this or that or that or that. It was more like, okay, so these guys are doing it, and we rather try to become like a part of the institutional culture in which these processes are getting also discussed and kind of reformulated, and we contributed just like tiny bit, I guess, to this process. I wouldn't emphasize the role of the, you know, just of us, you know, like because we were just there from time to time. But I guess that with Katrin, we could, I mean, I would be very interested to hear how does it operate in general in consultancy when you make this kind of consultancy work, right? In terms of other industries as well. But Katrin, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I think just to add to what you said, Kuba, I think this proposition to read art as economic practice is not to be underestimated. And I know, but of course it's anecdotally, people who saw the exhibition, who saw other artists being entrepreneurs or whatever you want to call it, taking this as a possibility for their own position as well. And I think for me, you know, that's one of the big propositions of the exhibition, that we take our work also seriously as economic practice. The way I do art, I support or subvert certain systems, and they are always related to economy. So I think this will live on through the exhibition, and there will be interviews, there will be reviews in various outlets. But I think for Kuban it was, and what Catherine described, this like functioning redrawing room within an art institutional context, we want to publish this, just, you know, the main ingredients of like what are the main moments and conditions and invitations that you need to make that happen, because it would also allow a lot of other art spaces to like rethink their own economy, but also to rethink what they use drawing for.
Maybe Douglas has got some insights because about the consultancy world, because he actually used to work in that field too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I love to contribute something. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that case and some of the work y'all have been working on. That's, yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about that point that was raised about the it sounds like kind of a dissonance between the institutional keenness to display work about these things, but a reluctance to adopt or internalize some of those same ideas and practices. And just made me think, and then connecting that then to this question around kind of, more, kind of commercial economic opportunities and kind of bridging that gap. And it just makes me think about the importance of space for young artists, who, and particularly those young artists from backgrounds that don't have necessarily a whole lot of capital to be able to access more prestigious spaces, right? And that connection between the level of prestige and the openness in a lot of these kind of art spaces. And, so, and I've had this conversation with some Aboriginal artists here in Australia, where I'm based out of, and it just along the lines of the kind of entrepreneurial aspects of artistic development and cultivating that as a practice and skill set for young artists. It made me think of a case in my hometown, Minneapolis. There's a place called Juxtaposition Arts, and what they do in terms of where that then connects with kind of economic opportunities is they'll employ methods which you may have heard of, one's called tactical urbanism, or has been called tactical urbanism. And that's really kind of where these young people, young artists, and high school age through to young adulthood, who are employed by various kind of local businesses to do art interventions that also collect data of some type of social purpose. And then, so the tactical urbanism is kind of like, it might be a pop-up kind of artistic installation to attract people, and then they'll do some data collection. And then presumably that usually goes to some type of a local intervention. So it's usually nonprofits that will kind of support this. But it's a great opportunity for young artists to earn some income. And it's a way that, and a lot of times they're engaged by larger artistic institutions. So I just thought it might be, relevant or of interest to what you all have been talking about in terms of ways where, you can kind of bridge a bit of that dissonance between larger, well-funded, well-capitalized institutions who, have an interest, or have people within those institutions who have an interest in, equity and other types of outcomes and things like that, and giving them opportunities, to actually practice that. So there's some things that are happening in addition. This, from what I'm hearing now, seems to be another example of how that might be practiced. So appreciate that. And hopefully that was, interesting. If you're interested, again, as Juxtaposition Arts, if you wanted to look into that particular case.
Yeah, thanks for pointing them out. Looks amazing. I will have a proper look. Yeah, and thanks for bringing it up. And I think, I think for me, always the big invitation by like Take Back the Economy, like the whole work by J.K. Gibson Graham, was to like quite confidently become an economist, and a lot of artists like split it between, that's the creative side, and then I also have to run the business, and really think it together, because both need a lot of creativity, in order to move us forward. And I think that's a really nice message, that, you know, the economy needs a lot of new thinking and new ways of doing if we want to change something. And to take this stigma of like, oh, you know, you can't do art and you can't do economy, and but in both areas actually quite authoritarian. You know, art is very and economy is very, so to democratize both, yeah, I think that's for me the nice transdisciplinarity here. But yeah, thanks for pointing out juxtaposition. I will have a good look after the session.
But it's also like this coin model that we presented. I mean, this coin diagram, right? It was basically the aim of this was also to manifest, let's say, that there are different models, right? That there is a model such as possibly juxtaposition art, or like other such like artistic initiatives make operational. And because typically what happens is that out of these two sides of the coin, only one is being seen and one is being considered as hegemonic, or like hegemonic in a sense as only, you know, that there is no alternative, that you simply just need to follow the money, you need to follow the equity, you need to basically, that art is a luxury. You know, it's not that it may be luxury under certain circumstances, but it simply is a luxury, and that's it, right? Or that art has to cost a lot, that, you know, good art is precious, etc., etc. There are like a lot of ideas about what art is that being institutionally reproduced, while this kind of initiatives like juxtaposition art or other initiatives like that, they're considered, oh, is it really art? Is it really social practice? Maybe it's a social practice, maybe it's something else. You know, there are like a lot of ways how to devalue it. How to say, okay, this is not interesting, right? This is not something that we should consider as a real regular kind of artistic or art institutional proposition. And this diagram was the aim of it was actually to emphasize that, no, this is not true. There are like alternatives, and as an institution, you can basically really think about what kind of art economy you reproduce and what kind of art you actually make, because this can be a lot of different things. It can be commons, it can be, you know, luxury.
I have two questions. So first of all, thank you for taking us through the exhibition. I've seen many images and I know the Whitworth. So now hearing you speak through, it was nice to put everything together, having not experienced it myself. And I have two questions. One, if you could perhaps elaborate a bit on the workshops element, like, did you have any pre-identified groups or target audiences in plan? Were they open? How did the kind of people react, or the workshop participants react to such thematics? And the second question, I don't know if you feel like elaborating on this or not, but I'm just wondering how the shift in the institutional context, the fact that you were invited by Alistair, and then Alistair was kind of forced to resign, to move away from the Whitworth. What kind of layer did this add to the multi-layered economies of the exhibition itself? If there are any, perhaps, I don't know, personal reactions or personal, I don't know, experiences in relation to this, which usually do not come through an exhibition, like what's hidden underneath that yourself as with regards to yourself as practitioners.
Can I say something about the workshop? So there were different layers. There were either the theme was taken by everybody who works with community groups and within the constituencies, was taken into those ongoing programs, whether it's school programs or groups who meet every week. So the wider team, about 10, took it into those groups and to raise it as a topic, but also as workshops there. And we, together with the team, developed a kind of like skills and language that everybody felt like, oh, I can take it to that group. And each group required probably different language around it, a different invitation, different tools. So that was kind of done institutionally, like through all programming that goes on, raise this question of drawing and redrawing the economy. In the space itself, it was either very casual, and I think people get it from what they see on the wall. It's like, oh, that's what's meant. There were guided sessions with like amazing artists in Manchester who just helped people to do more elaborate drawings and to think in probably more complexity. And then there were workshops, and workshops normally work quite well once you take away this fear of I have to make a nice drawing. Honestly, that's the biggest barrier. Yeah.
Yeah, but to add to this, like also, so there were also these workshops that led towards this. So this was like workshops that we conducted with the Whitworth team before the exhibition actually opened. So there have been several. So this was another key input into making this grabs. And also during the exhibition, I also worked with, for example, a group that deals with open archives and kind of common-based archives. So we also conducted a kind of specific session around the opening. We had an amazing session because there were like a lot of artists in the room. So they were all very familiar. So like there were people from Lombok, people from Taipao, from other groups who partook in the exhibition, and they also contributed a lot of drawings, and there were quite a lot of them were very, very nice. And about others, about other part of your question, I think that like the biggest impact of this change of leadership, I mean, there were like several, of course. First is whether you are, whether you know or don't, how these sessions could contribute to the processes of institutional change. It's very hard to say because of the leadership structure. And second of all is a matter of economy of time and uncertainty and precarity. So like there were people who basically were with whom we worked, like Poppy or Ed. They suddenly had to conduct all the other duties that typically directors are responsible for. So you had this team of people who were overstretched during the process of making this exhibition, because they really were like overburdened with the amount of institutional duties that they had to conduct. But still, there's still, in spite of this scarcity of time, they still were amazingly supportive. So this was so there was also resilience and so on and so forth, and then I hope that the team will basically stay how it is, and then like this exercise, which was quite a long and profound one, will help them to think about what they do and what they value and what is important in this constituent museums, how it operates and how rich it is in the future.
I want to add something, and I have to be quite careful because the situation has changed a lot. Ron Grupa proposed Lumbung. And, that's on a large global scale. That's the biggest art event, 1 million visitors, global media attention. And the real value of their proposition to reorganize the economy in the arts towards a more collective, collaborative system never could become present and foregrounded because of the severe racist, anti-Semitic accusations they had to face for over a year. So I just want to say this as a real a fact, yeah. So the real proposition of Documenta was never foregrounded because it was suppressed by this anti-Semitic accusation that went on in a very, very heavy and racist way, mainly in Germany. Alistair had to leave his position also, being shut down with the accusation of being anti-Semitic. And now again, we live in a different world for the last few weeks, where certain critique can endanger the person who airs it. Yeah. So, but I think that's all I'm trying to say, is that it's therefore more important to be quite explicit and to see those practices as anti-oppression practices, and to stand in solidarity with people who want actual change. But that is, until 4 weeks ago, it was quite easy to tell that story, like Lumbung happened and alles. And now we're again living in, at least where I live, UK and Germany, in a climate where, yeah, you have to be quite clear that you're not anti-Semitic, but you critique certain politics. So I just wanted to add to this, because that anti-Semitic accusation of Rangrupa last year was drastic, in the sense that the scope of the exhibition was never recognized and enabled.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed it many times, I think, but like, and it doesn't, I mean, I totally agree, but what I think was the most important aspect of Lumbung was completely overshadowed by basically other debate. We could discuss who was right and who was accused for what reason and so on and so forth. But the fact is that this main message of the exhibition, I think, what's the like main proposition of it was never really received, or like were not really digested because of this, because it was sidelined by discussing the contents, right? Like we talked about, this is like an interesting aspect of the arts as well. But I think in academia is also not so very much different, right? I mean, like art and academia, like as both kind of social universes specialized in producing meanings, right? And kind of, and discourses. There is always this disparity or tension between what you say and how you operate, right? And there is also a tendency to basically never, and that's why I think also, like I would maybe once again emphasize, that's why this exhibition was so specific, because you typically simply do not think about economies of exhibition making. You simply don't. You never, like in reviews, you know, this is something like, you know, typically very much kind of like overshadowed, sidelined. You know, reviews are always about artworks. Why should you discuss economies here? You know, like art is what matters, how it is produced. Not so much, of course, like there's also a lot of vested interests in maintaining this way of acting, and it also serves its purpose to sideline activities that would consider, like you, Kachin, say, like this art as an economic practice, or like that would consider alternatives to the mainstream way of organizing, or like market-oriented art worlds. Yeah. And this exhibition tries to make it do slightly differently, but this is art specific.
I think the university is even more backward, though. I don't think we are ever seeing a Lumbung type intervention within the university sector to say, you know, knowledge is an economic practice, and the way in which it's being being produced at the moment, and to some extent, you know, the Community Economies Institute, as a sort of non-government or non-university research and education institution, AWERO, we've tried to talk about. It's a way of trying to step outside the university the economy of the university, to try and set up an alternative, independent kind of way of doing research and education. But but that's sort of sidestepping the kind of perhaps more upfront confrontation that might happen if you tried to take on the university within its own frame, just as Lumbung tried to do within Documenta, you know. So yeah, and you know, there's a whole that issue of private versus public, and you know, Australian universities are mainly public universities, but they've been so oriented towards private profits from overseas students and all this kind of thing. So it's a big issue, and in a way, the Community Economies group have kind of sidestepped it as an economic focus. But imagine if the Lumbung experiment had actually been able to be really unfold and really try and run that whole exhibition space within it with a different economy. It would be quite interesting to imagine kind of how it kind of might have unfolded. Will there ever be another chance to do it, I wonder, as a question, you know?
This is possibly, this is in the arts. I mean, it is possible to do it because you have exhibition, you have this project-based economy, right? So like curators are responsible solely for delivering one exhibition, or one, like in case of Documenta, it's a huge exhibition. It has like a gigantic budget, like 40 million euros or something. But they do not really, I mean, Lumbung was also like an exercise in redistribution, like this different redistribution of these resources that were generated using quite typical means of like public subsidies, ticketing, and so on and so forth. And we could actually discuss where let's say, focal points that actually turned sour as well. So for example, this discussion about anti-Semitism in Germany specifically is very problematic because of the state involvement in this, first of course in Holocaust, and then in supporting art. So there is this kind of huge emphasis on policing the public funding so that it does not breach this post-war consensus, right? So this is one thing. Another, but then also Documenta is run by ticket sales. So this is like the huge element of the budget is basically comes from the tickets, which are actually quite expensive. They're like about 20-30 euros, and not only this, is also part of the tourist economy of the region. So the problem here was that these tickets, for example, what I realized, right, but the tickets for Documenta were sold for only 2 days. I mean, if you are a local resident and so on, you could sort yourself a pass. But if you were coming from outside, like my students did, they could only basically visit for 2 days, or they would have to pay another 30 euros or 25 euros to stay for longer. The point was that Lumbung as such was a proposition for a community building, so that actually it would be served best, like for people who stay there for a week or 2, they can just make holidays and partake, this variety of activities that were presented. So I can just show it to you to like emphasize this kind of tension, let's say, between a typical way of doing things, which is sales of tickets, and how Lumbung operated as an exhibition practice that basically was based on participation community act. Or another thing that is typical for arts is that previous editions of Documenta were very much embedded in the art market. So what you do is basically, so what you do when you run this kind of events, and some people still did it in this at this exhibition too, is that galleries partake in the production costs. So and also in exhibition costs quite often. They are expected that artists and galleries take over a kind of cost of producing given work under the remit that they will be presented, and the kind of both symbolic and potentially symbolic value will be ramped up, and the prices will be influenced positively as well. So there were, and here Lumbung basically completely, like Ruan Grupa totally split this. So there were almost no private galleries involved in the production of this exhibition. And interestingly, immediately this exhibition was accused that it did not present any art. Right, so this was a typical kind of, right, Katrin? This was like, where is art? Where are these objects? Where are these private? Like this was one of the typical responses to this. And which needs to be taken into account. I know that this is specifically contemporary art, but it is like quite funny social universe, and it may also maybe translate to other experiences that we have as well. But and that's why I guess that also this emphasizing that art practice and economic practice, that we can discuss economies, and that we should, and that you can organize things differently. It also gives possibly, and this is like maybe to mirror academia, it also gives quite a space for this type of experimentation with various ways how you make art, right? So like more community oriented, more economically equitable, more just, supporting various activities for social transition. And possibly that's also the discussion in academia about various methodologies that would be more community-centered, action research, that it would be like, academics and people basically becoming actively involved in the processes of social transformation, right? And we also know how academia is very strongly policing against this, how strong the policing against this kind of activities used to be, at least, because possibly it has changed over years, I guess, like you, Katrin, also contributed to this change, right?
Just lastly, I mean, I thought the way you codified or had got that language down into those small sentences around the commoning versus the private was really excellent, and we shouldn't lose those. You said that you put a lot of time into getting the language down into these very succinct phrases, and I think I'd just like to be able to hang on to them, because I think they're really useful, and they possibly do translate over into not just art but knowledge production. So somewhere along the lines we need to write that up or somehow get it out there. I think they were really
I think
really succinct. Yeah.
The double-sided coin. Thanks, Catherine, for pointing it out.
Yes.
But of course, it's also strongly influenced by this idea that also comes out of the CII and others, that it's about interdependence. Also this idea that we change everything tomorrow, not happening, to acknowledge both, but still make it a decision. You either support this or you support that. So of course there will be no purist new art economy, and Documenta of course wasn't, Lumbung wasn't, because it sits within a very rigid institutional structure. But to acknowledge this and to make it so obvious that it's still about a choice. You want to support this or you want to support that. And in the arts, it's just not talked about, how Kuba said. And most people don't know that what we see is stuff that comes off the market. It's a very market-centered world, the museum world. Very few people know that. And just to make those things more explicit and change systems, you can buy art from a studio. You don't have to go to a commercial gallery. But yeah, thank you. I think a double-sided coin was quite a strong image to, sometimes we can't influence which side it flips onto, but often we can.
I mean, this was, this was, I think, also looking for a strong image, so like what we did also in this bowling pavilion, right? Like, so looking for images that would be kind of but like visual one-liners, right? So so you have like art economy or academic economies, like this double-sided coin, right? You can choose. It's not that it's
Well, it's funny because I started off today, and actually Douglas was there too at 9 a.m. this morning. It's now 9:20 in the evening, but we started off with a wonderful discussion about commoning and legal pluralities. And one of the things that came up were Janelle Orsi, who works in the Sustainable Law Center in San Francisco, was talking about how they're trying to she worked with a community where they've decided to sing an easement. So an easement is a kind of a way of having access to land where multiple people can use it. Rather than writing it down, the community decided to sing it. And learn it and sing it and own it in that way. And then Douglas brought up a story of him working with an energy enterprise in Minnesota, where you came up with a jingle that was very useful in terms of focusing on what the enterprise was about. So it's the visual one-liner, the jingle, the artistic practice of the drawing or the singing or the acting out seems to be something that's a really productive area for us to be thinking about working in more, as a way of getting people into some kind of embodiment of a different kind of economy. It's Douglas, do you want to jump in?
yeah, just to add to that, Kath, I mean, it's I think to me, it's I'm someone who likes even just the idea of kind of observing what is happening, or different tools that are used to continue to kind of reproduce the economic systems that we kind of had to try to adapt to. And so the jingle writing is a particularly kind of effective one, because you're kind of using that tool of a hook, right, to kind of just like the idea of a chorus, a good song chorus that kind of hooks you, and instead of hooking you in the direction of buying some consumer product, some fast moving consumer good, or hooking you into repeating a song so you like it and buy more albums or go to the concert. It's about kind of hooking people into these other alternative imaginaries and futures. And so that just conceptually I like that. The other thing I think that I might just raise quickly is thinking about art, there's a certain kind of, the art of iconography, even, national kind of iconography and symbolism. And, I think about on the US dollar bill, there's this image of the eagle. And if you look at the eagle, it's got, in its talons, it's got in one of them, it's got arrows, and then the other one, it's got an olive branch. And I've always thought about that, again, along this line of kind of subverting these symbols. I've always thought that, from the perspective of, an activist researcher or a community organizer, I think that's a very effective idea, right? Is that the pressure in the military, or in the U.S. state terms, those arrows represent military might. The olive branch is supposed to represent some type of, diplomacy, or if it's like, if the olive branch doesn't work, then we've got the arrows, right? That's kind of what that's saying. But when I think about how a community or organization might think with that as a tool or construct for whatever kind of resistance, that it might look like your arrows are community pressure, right? And advocacy, and using the arts to apply that pressure in different ways, potentially. You think about Bob Marley and other very influential international artists from all different types of cultures and places in the world, or even locally influential, and that whole scale in between. And then, and then that can open up pathways. We were talking about earlier, Kath, if you remember that comment about creating cracks that then can be kind of, exploited, if you will, right? Or widened to make fertile ground for some of these changes. So that, the analogy of, or that metaphor of the olive branch that can then be more the kind of, co-design, or, these kind of, more, once you've applied enough pressure to kind of create and disturb the ground a little bit and make it fertile, then you can kind of come through with using arts to try to, sow some other types of seeds. So anyway, I don't know, it might be a bit tangential, but I just, that's what happens when you start talking about arts, and in the context of change. Is, this is some of the things that you guys, this conversation has kind of provoked for me. So.
Right. Thank you.
Open up Pandora's box.
Yeah.
I definitely want a jingle now for company drinks, that's for sure.
I do, yes. Well, Douglas is a rapper. Maybe he'll come up with one for you.
Yeah.
I have a feeling I'm going to have to bow out, though, because it's been a long Liviana today with wonderful conversations, but it's getting to be my bedtime.
Yeah, I was looking at the time. We have a 2-hour slot, which we said, if we want to use it, we can. If not, we finish early. So I think, Catherine, of course, please sign off. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks very much for
I don't
great
know,
session.
And Claudia and Douglas and Christina, we can stay a bit longer if you want to, but also absolutely no obligation to be.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a night owl. I'll stay for a bit. Bye, Kath.
Bye, Kath.
Yeah, I've got a bit more time if you guys do. I'm good. Still got a bit more steam.
Yeah. So how involved are you with juxtaposition? Is it a place or you work with them?
Yeah, I've worked informally over the years. I've actually kind of helped advise some of their folks some years back around different methods, tactical urbanism being one of them. But they do a number of things. I've got a couple personal friends that have worked. One guy who's done their kind of business development. I've worked with the son of one of the organizers. So just kind of informally through personal networks and a bit of kind of bye, Claudia. And just working with people, who are part of the organization. So they do a lot of really, really kind of innovative work for that area and that region. And particularly, from my work with youth organizations in general, or youth organizations that work in the arts, there's been a big push for kind of youth-led initiatives. And, some organizations will kind of adopt that, it might be, it's interesting the kind of social dynamics at play in a lot of smaller nonprofits that work in the art space. But yeah, Juxtaposition does a lot. And then where I'm based here in Sydney, there's another organization called Blacktown Youth Services Association, which has a music studio, and they serve, a lot of the refugee and migrant community. And provide that studio space, and a lot of good talent comes out of there. So yeah, it's interesting. You see a lot of sometimes, it's a hotbed for artistic, kind of developments in a lot of these spaces, but they're just not getting resourced to kind of amplify, what they're doing. But
yeah, because I mean, like, because I live in the UK, there were studies around the economic barriers into the arts. They're incredible. And I think that comes back to what also Puba said, like, where is the money being spent?
Right.
So a lot of those museum budgets could also be spent on other stuff. No one is saying we have to do exhibitions all the time. But that's a bit of radical thinking, which is a bit too much for organizations who that's what they do, to even imagine that you could do it differently. I think, again, that was a reason why Lumbung Documenta was interesting, because it was also an exhibition, but it was also a festival. It also supported a lot of people financially. They just did it.
Have you seen much of a push in the UK or elsewhere in Europe for creating kind of permanent like a permanent affordable installation space, both for the production of art and the display of art?
You know what, I think that, like, in Poland, like the like 95% of the artistic, or even like 100%, almost like maybe 99% of kind of like institutions are public. So you have and then there are still new opening, and then there are like quite a lot of every major city has an art space that was established in 60s and 70s during real socialism. And then also quite a few institutions emerged in 90s, 2000s. Now with the authoritarian governments, there was a push for more like kind of like, let's say, museum building, but more related to, let's say, national history. So yes, there is a lot of spaces, but then most of them have like a lot of economic problems. So like they just what is being done is that municipalities or state, they just simply provide money for infrastructure. I think with the Whitworth is quite similar, and they do not have a lot of money for programming, or even less so for public outreach or for educational programs. So this is also on the one hand, and then they are dependent also on collecting, in Poland less so, but I think in England quite often on wealthy donors, where who buys what, and then this is, so there are like a lot of connections. And I think on the other hand, also art doesn't operate in a social vacuum, right? So like you have a situation in which people simply cannot afford to study art, or they have to study something practical if they do not come from wealthier backgrounds, right? So like this is something that I teach people in the art academy, and it's not as bad here as it is in London. Because in London, when we, for example, commissioned Rosalie Schweiker to write a comic about London art world, it's a magnet for like wealthy people from all over the world. And you can see how very much this kind of academic art industry is embedded in class structures on a global scale, not only on the local, but also on the global scale.
Right.
So you may have like sorry.
No, just because, Douglas, it was such a concrete question, like spaces. So just one example, I think on a like national level, the Tate galleries, which are the main museums in London, the two Tates. The new Tate has an entire floor which can be used for off-the-market temporary installation by community groups. So I think that was a positive signal to say we have a whole floor. Yeah, cool. I'm not going to be too, but again, it was a big message by someone like the Tate saying we have a whole floor that's more open to other less established, not yet on the market stuff. But again, they have this problem. There's not enough money to actually pay people for their time. It's assumed that people come with resources to then use that. And of course, then you can put on your CV you had an installation at Tate, which is good for your art CV, but it still doesn't acknowledge that just by giving space doesn't mean it's accessible. You need to pay for time. And then I think that just the other group I wanted to mention, you probably know, is Art Co-op.
Cool.
in the States, and they lobby on quite a big scale for funders to spend their money differently.
Okay.
Because if there were more funds that don't fund, let's say, exhibitions or staff costs, but would actually fund people's time to make art,
Oh, wow.
the scene would look a bit different. So I'm just thinking, because they've been working for 2 or 3 years now, and I think they're quite strong in their message.
That's fantastic. I'm checking them out now. Thank you for this. It's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, and I take your point too, Kuba. What it sounded like a point you were making as well, just around the fact that you can have the space, but it doesn't necessarily. I think you're both kind of making that point that it doesn't necessarily translate to whatever the intended outcome is, which makes perfect sense.
I mean,
Yeah.
there is in contemporary art, because of its topsy-turvy economy, there is an expectation that artists work for free, because they basically earn money by selling the artworks. This is how it operates, right? So you just make exhibitions just for the sake of exposure, and how you gather money for your for your art activity is basically up to you.
Right.
Institutions do not take responsibility for this. So there was a lot of, and this of course creates, study is one thing, like whether you can afford studying, but then whether you can afford practicing art, this is another matter, right? How you actually, but this is, how you actually earn your money when you practice art, but it's also usually quite time consuming. And paradoxically, for institutions to take over commissions that would involve a lot of people is very expensive. You need to fly in people. They need to spend a long time in Manchester. It involves a lot of organization, preparation, etc., etc. While exhibiting a painting doesn't, and you have a gallery who will make it easier for you. So it creates a lot of institutional burden. I think at the end also a bit of a reluctance, or to get seriously involved in this kind of, let's say, more embedded or socially embedded artistic practices, when you actually really serious about that, and not just say, oh, it's funny, or something. It's just when you actually really do it, rather than just simply
And
but this is specific to art, because with this public subsidies, and that art is not commercial, so it's also, I think, already in music is different, because there wouldn't be an expectation for that there is typically, you just earn money by selling your copies or making concerts, etc. So there is
doing tours and stuff.
So this is, so even in kind of, let's say, cultural industries, it really varies dependent on what sector we are discussing. And we are here embedded in this visual art with its own specific, with economies.
Right. Wow. Okay. This is really insightful. Thank you.
I think I put another example in the chat. And there's also quite a good essay by Chundin. And I think for artists often think, oh, I make my living there and I do my art over there. I have to, that's a possibility, of course, but there's also the possibility that you bring it together by organizing as a business or as an economy. So like this example, migrants in culture, that's what they're trying to do at the moment, that people don't have to split their art making from their money earning on a kind of more self-organized level. And I mean, all of this is going to be hard work, it's like how to run an enterprise, it's not less difficult than when you do it on your own. But I think for artists to see that this is a possibility, that, they don't have to split this and I have to earn money here in order to do what I want to do somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of brings to mind for me, I'm going to look into this one as well. Thank you. I think about the, Kath mentioned earlier, I did a jingle that was, for me, it was great because I got a bit of money to do something that, I got to rap. It was for an energy, a local energy company, and it was a cooperative. And so what they were doing is they had a energy, so solar panels on top of a local high school, and this is a really underserved, lower income community, predominantly Black neighborhood. And so they were making this, solar energy accessible and affordable in the community. and I got to do a jingle about it. And the cool thing about it was just, just like you were saying, it was the opportunity to connect, my interest in hip hop and rap and poetry, but then also to my interest in, sustainability and things like that. Because I'm doing how I connected into all this. So I'm at the University of Western Sydney University doing a PhD right now in the area of just sustainabilities. So one of the things I'm looking at are things like, critical hip hop pedagogy, performative hip hop pedagogy, where there's, there's a lot of published work on the use in education settings, but also as, form of critique, and really borrowing from Freire's work and, pedagogy of the oppressed, and really cool stuff. And to be able to, and so I'm actually trying to actively integrate this into my PhD. I'm in my first year of my candidature. And what I want to do is translate my findings in this area of food and housing security, or just transitions into food and housing security, transformation, and all these kind of whiz bang innovative words that are out there, and try to look across sectors around the barriers and enablers to these types of projects taking hold. So, working with community organizations are advocating for this, for example, land use change and things like that, to enable these types of projects like agri-hoods or cooperative housing, community land trusts, and things like that. And translating these findings and into hip hop, into a rap album, and then trying to really expand the concept of peer review, right? So it's not just academic scholars who are actually engaged in refining the thinking, but by using the medium of something that's more accessible, and creating kind of that artifice of art to kind of be able to manage the abstraction in a way that's is accessible to a broader audience, is something I'm experimenting with. So this is all really, really cool stuff. I'm really glad it's not everywhere where you can kind of find these intersections. And there's also, I might share too here that might be useful. I'm doing, this is a part of a project that's around cultural well-being in the art space as well, in terms of it's another one of a number of frameworks that might be of interest. I'll just share it quickly, if I can find it here. Yeah, throw it in.
Yeah, I just want to say, Douglas, it's super nice that we are able to connect here. Because I think, like, an experience that Kuba and I had in the beginning was like, so I'm always down as like, an artist. Not an artist come in to like do something to the content, like make it sound more interesting, or make it look more interesting. And it took us quite a bit to say, oh no, just because we come with the art, we also come with a certain criticality towards the same subjects that you are having. And that took a little bit to like recognize this transdisciplinarity, rather than just coming as a creative who can do a jingle or can do a drawing. Those jingles and those drawings are political, they have a criticality. So to meet on that level, rather than this like there's thinking and there's like some other format. So I think it would be really nice to continue this conversation, Douglas, also within the context of CI and CERN. What it means to, and I haven't quite reached I'm not quite sure yet, but I think those conversations could help to, like, it's not bringing the arts in, it's something else. No, it's because I teach business students, and it's always about like, oh, why do we do arts? And I don't want to sell arts as like the creative moment or the thinking outside of the box moment. I don't want it to be this other. I just want to feel everyone enabled to use it as well. It's as well rather than and also. So, but yeah, that would be a great conversation to continue. Like, I would love to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just throw this for anybody too. I'll throw my email in here.
So where you're based now, Douglas?
I'm based in Sydney.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm based in Sydney. My two field sites for my project are here in Sydney and in Minneapolis. So I'm doing kind of a comparative analysis of how just sustainability initiatives are taking place in the two places. around food and housing security. So yeah, I'm working kind of looking at community economies, and also trying to look at other, being a bit agnostic around, or I guess adaptive in how you explain projects to try to maximize buy-in without without losing the essence, right? Which is always
Yeah.
familiar with that tension.
I know.
But you know what I mean? It's sometimes, for example, I look at just thinking about methodologies for a moment, participatory action research. I might use that language in one context, and then, living labs in another context, because that's got a little bit more gravitas with, particular types of cohorts. It's just, it's one of those things where you kind of trying to not get bound up in all of the currency of different, buzzwords and or different slight nuances and methods. But yeah, I've got the email address there. And yeah, I'd be happy to continue this conversation, and really, really good to know kind of what's happening outside of Australia and the US, and so it's really cool.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Well, I've got you here too. Yeah, I'll just send an email quick. So, yeah, what time is it there now in Europe?
Well, I'm in the UK. It's just 11 o'clock. Cuba, you're reaching noon. Christina,
Yeah.
I didn't ask where you were today. Where are you?
I'm in
No,
Malta.
I mean
So it's
Warsaw.
noon.
Yeah.
It's noon for
Okay.
you as well, right, Cuba?
Sorry?
It's noon for you.
Yeah, it is. It's Warsaw time. Okay.
I mean, I think also and then this buzzword catalog could be quite, I mean, that could be like a writing session. We could meet once for like a few hours and just all those buzzwords and how you use them in different contexts so people actually understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things get lost in translation.
Absolutely.
Just from one group to the other, not just from discipline to discipline, but yeah.
Yeah,
So super nice to meet. Christina, thank you so much for being here for the whole session.
Thanks to you
Yeah,
for
thanks so
sharing
much.
all
Yeah.
that.
Cuba, thank you
journey.
to you as always.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's reconnect quite soon.
Yeah, we will connect. We will reconnect quite soon, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Good. Fantastic.
Good
Thanks so
night,
much.
good day.
Thank you very much.
Good
Bye.
day.
Yeah.
Good night.
See ya.
Bye.